Okay, today is the 6th of March, 2010. I am interviewing Walter Chop, who was born on November 10th, 1924. The two people who are at this interview are Robert Mastroni, who is doing the interview, and Walter Chop, who I'm interviewing. Walter Chop was in World War II. He was in what was then called the Army Air Corps. His rank was a corporal, and he served in England, France, and Italy. So we're ready to begin the interview. Were you drafted, Walter, or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
Tell us how that came about.
Well, I tried to enlist in the Marines, and they refused because of my poor vision. And then I tried to enlist in the Navy, and they refused because of my poor vision. And several months later, I was drafted, and that was it.
And where were you living at the time?
In Bridgeport, Connecticut.
What was the address at the time?
I lived at 413 East Main Street in Bridgeport.
And so why did you join?
I tried to join
Why did you try to join?
because I wanted to get into the service. I was anxious to do my part in the war effort, and I was anxious. So right after graduating high school, I tried to join both the Navy and the Air Force, the Navy and the Marines, but they wouldn't accept me because of my poor vision. And finally, several months after that, I was drafted, and they had taken me in the Air Force.
Can you recall your first days in the service, what it was like?
Oh yes, I enjoyed it. My basic training I did in Miami Beach, Florida, and it was like a vacation. We lived in hotels. We did our exercises and marching on the beach in Miami Beach, and it was just wonderful. We were eating in the best hotels and served as though we were guests, and it was just great. And we had very little additional duty outside of our basic training, and we enjoyed it very, very much. It was like a wonderful vacation.
Do you remember any of the instructors that you had at the
No.
time?
No, that was over 60 years ago.
Any experiences in boot camp that stand out in your mind?
No. Well, we were living in a hotel, and it wasn't like living in a camp, and eating in restaurants and sleeping in beautiful places. 2 men to a room. We had our own showers. It was just great, absolutely great.
So you, all in all, good experience.
Yes, like a vacation.
Now, you served in World War II, and tell us exactly, chronologically, where did you go during the course of your time in the service?
Well, from basic training, we went through a number of different tests to see what we were qualified for the most. And apparently, they put me into parachute school, and I learned how to pack parachutes. We were transferred. I went to a place in Illinois, and that's where they taught us how to pack parachutes. And that's what my job was. Eventually, from there, they transferred me to a squadron, the 439th Troop Carrier Group, 93rd Squadron, and I was one of the parachute riggers. There were a number of us.
Could you explain a little bit more detail? What's a parachute rigger? What do you mean by packing a chute?
Chutes had to be packed and repacked every 60 days. So we knew they weren't damp or anything like that. So we would unpack a packed parachute, unpack it, and refold it and put it back in its case. Each person in the Air Force who we worked with had to be fitted separately. And since I had background as a tailor in civilian life, I was the one who did it the best. And I was doing most of the officers' fit
Fitted for what?
for the parachute. Each parachute fits according to your size, and we had to fit them. They had to try the parachute on, and we would tighten it up and stitch it so it would fit that person, and only that person could use that parachute. If you were big, it was one way. It was if you were small. I'm very small. I was 5'6", and I was fitting up people who were 6'6". So you could see the difference in sizes, and it made a big difference in fitting them. So I was fitting them since I had a lot of experience in civilian life as a tailor.
So part of it was sewing the...
We did a lot of sewing too, yeah. And if there was anything, as we were packing the parachutes, if we saw any type of tear or anything, I would sew it up and stitch it. We had sewing machines. And it was a very interesting kind of work.
So did you end up in this because of your tailor background?
Yes. I don't know why they would have put me in there otherwise.
But you weren't in actual combat,
No.
correct?
I saw no combat at all.
Were there any casualties in your unit that you worked for? Or
No.
were they all...
No. We used to fly the paratroopers. The troop carriers carried paratroopers. Like when we started in England, we used to fly them into France, and they would jump, and our airplanes would come back to England.
So you weren't on the airplane when they jumped?
No.
You would be back in England?
Right.
So did you ever jump out of a plane?
No, no. We were not allowed to jump.
Okay. So you packed uniforms for those who then subsequently jumped, like...
Yes.
Were they, for example, individuals who jumped in D-Day at Normandy? Did you pack the chutes for those people?
We didn't pack them for the soldiers. The soldiers packed their own who jumped. They packed their own chutes. We packed them for our Air Force personnel who was flying them over. So in the event they had to jump from the airplane, they'd have their own parachute. It was only our people. The paratroopers were from different units, and we were just flying them over.
So paratroopers packed their own
Yes,
parachute?
yes. We packed them for our Air Force flying personnel from our unit.
Okay. Did you, any experiences in the service during the time that you were, now you say you went to England?
Yeah,
And to France?
yeah.
Now, explain how that happened. You first went to England?
First went to England, and after the United States and our allies took over France, then we moved into France. We went to an airport in France, and we were stationed in France.
So that would have been after 44 then?
Yes, yes. I don't remember the exact time the Allies took over France, but that's when we moved into France.
Do you remember where you were stationed?
No, not in France. No, I don't remember.
Did you ever get liberties in France?
Oh yes, oh yes. You know, we worked like we worked as civilians. We'd work, 5 days a week, packing parachutes, repacking parachutes, fixing and fitting up officers. And on weekends we would have leave to go into, we used to go to Paris and places like that.
And then from there you went to Italy, was it?
Yes. We were in Italy for just a very short period.
Again, doing the same thing?
Yes.
Memorable times or people that you met anywhere along the way, England, France, or?
Oh yes, we met a lot of people. Of course, I don't remember their names, but everyone was very, very sociable to the troops in Europe. They were very, very sociable.
When you say anyone, you talk about civilian population?
Civilians, yes.
What did you do for entertainment then during the times that you were, when you were stationed there?
Well, we used to go to the movies there, theaters, and of course we went to a lot of cocktail lounges and we had it was almost like being a civilian. We enjoyed it very, very much.
And I see you had some medals or citations. Can you just talk about those? What were they?
Well, it's a good conduct, of course, and then I forgot what the other citations were for.
Oh, that was at the European Theater.
Yes,
Ribbon.
yeah.
And a distinguished unit badge. Recall what that signifies. That has to do with your unit receiving a citation.
Yes.
For.
Doing our work and doing it well.
Okay. And which I assume you, because of the nature of what you did, you took it your work very seriously.
Oh, yes.
Because you had
Oh, yes.
lives in the balance.
Yes. We were very serious about our work.
Did you stay, during the time you were in the service, were you able to stay in touch with your family?
Just by mail.
And explain that. How often did you get letters, and were these the things called emails or something?
Yes, yes. And of course I sent letters home to my mother and father, and two of my brothers were in service, and I used to write to them. One of my brothers was in the infantry, and he was fighting in Europe, different parts of Europe. And my other brother was in the Navy, and he was stationed out in Chicago on the lake. I forgot the name of the lake that bordered Chicago. And then from there he went to California, but he never went overseas.
Were you in contact with your brothers?
By mail. And when I was went to parachute school, it was in Illinois, and it was a short distance away from Chicago. And on weekends I used to visit my brother in Chicago.
And the one that was in the infantry in Europe, did you see him while
No,
you were over there?
not at all, no.
To talk a little bit about the food that you had, particularly when you were in England and France and Italy, was that Army? Was it basically Army
Yes,
food, mess
yes.
food, what they call mess food?
Yes.
What was that like, the mess food?
I thought it was very, very good. Many of the people complained, I don't know why, but I thought it was excellent. The food was good, well prepared, and of course some of us occasionally did KP. We worked in the kitchens, and that was on rare occasions, not too often did we do it. But I thought the food was good, and of course in both England and France we enjoyed, when we were on leave, to go to the fancy restaurants and enjoy the food.
Enough to eat? Did they give you plenty?
More than enough to eat. I can't get over it. I don't know why a lot of people complained about Army food. I don't know what they were thinking about, but I thought it was excellent.
And so plenty of food, and so what about supplies, your uniforms and stuff? Were we always supplied? It had adequate supplies?
Anything we needed, and if something were damaged, if we tore a pair of pants or a jacket, we'd bring it to the supply department, and they take the old one and give us a new one.
We talked a minute ago about the responsibility that you had. Did you feel a sort of stress in your job, because you had a responsibility? Was that a stressful situation?
No, it wasn't. It was very similar to what I was doing in civilian life. So I felt very comfortable doing it.
Going back to this entertainment, whether you talk about England, France, or Italy, what did you do again to entertain yourself? You know, you had mentioned movies. Were there entertainers? Did USO or shows? Were there shows or things that you had?
Yes, on very rare occasions we had, I forgot what they called it, the USO would come and bring entertainers there. but that was on very, very rare occasions. During the war, we were just too busy to be able to leave our work to see entertainment.
So when you said movies, were they movies on base that you were talking?
No, the movies we saw were off base. We'd go into town, evenings, weekends.
Was it secure, or was there still any
No.
danger of bombing or
No,
whatever?
none whatsoever.
And in England, were they still bombing in England when you were there?
There was some bombing going on, but it didn't affect us at all because we were on the outskirts. They were doing most of the bombing in the bigger cities, and we were in camps on the outskirts.
So did you ever get into a place like London?
Oh yes,
Did you ever
very
make
often.
some- Now, could you see damage when you were
Not
there?
at that time, no. It was already, they were doing bombing of other countries at the time. We saw practically no bombing in England and in London. But there was some going on, but it never affected us.
So you didn't get to travel on leave when you were in the service and go places then? You were pretty
No.
much confined
Right.
to where you were,
Right.
the country you were in. Do you recall any humorous events, anything funny that happened when you were in the service?
Not really, only the humor we had among us in our groups, the people we worked with.
And was there a prankster in your group, or anybody that particular jokester or whatever?
Not really, no. If there was, I was the only one.
It was you?
Yeah, I always joked around.
Okay. Now, we had asked about photos, and you said you didn't have any photographs of even you in the service.
I had taken many photographs. I have no idea where they are. I've taken them in service, when I was on leave, many photos, and I can't find one.
Okay. And I asked you this already, but maybe there's something you want to elaborate about. Overall, what